The great salt sat at the center of the long table like a small silver monument, and Marianne Fairley had been placed a full arm's length below it, where the candlelight thinned and the good plate gave way to the everyday. She understood the arithmetic of the seating before she had fully lowered herself into the chair. Above the salt sat the family, and the guests who mattered, their glasses catching the light, their laughter easy and assured. Below it sat the tutor, the elderly cousin nobody quite knew what to do with, and now her. The distance was no more than the length of a serving dish. It was also the whole width of the world. Lady Prudence Denby, seated at the head in dove-gray silk and her late husband's diamonds, let her gaze travel the length of the table and settle on Marianne with the calm of a woman confirming that a thing had been done correctly. She lifted her fan a half-inch, a gesture Marianne had learned to read across 3 months of service in this house. "The poor relation may sit where there is room," Lady Prudence said to the woman beside her, not lowering her voice at all. "One cannot always find a place that suits every degree of misfortune." The words carried. They were meant to carry. Marianne kept her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the empty plate before her. And she did not let her face move, because a face that moved was a face that could be wounded, and she had decided some weeks ago that she would give this house nothing it could use. What the table did not know, what none of them could have guessed from the plain gray gown and the gloves mended twice at the seam, was that 11 months earlier Marianne had presided over a dinner of her own, in a house near Bath, with its own long table and its own silver, and that the hands now folded so still in her lap had once poured wine for a father who called her the cleverest of his children. That house was sold. The silver was sold. Her father was in the ground at Combe Fairley churchyard, and the debts he had hidden from her until the very end had swallowed everything but the small garnet ring that had been her mother's, which she wore now beneath her glove where no creditor and no cousin could see it. Stay with me through this dinner, because the woman below the salt is not what the room has decided she is. And by the time the candles burn down, there will be a man in this house who knows it. The man in question stood at that moment near the tall windows, at the far end of the hall, apart from the general noise, turning a wine-glass slowly in his fingers without drinking from it. Rowan Ashcombe, Baron Wexley, had been invited because the Denbys wished to be seen with him, and he had come because his estate bordered theirs, and there were drainage rights to be settled that were easier settled over dinner than through solicitors. He had a reputation in the county for coldness. He spoke little, danced never, and had not been known to pay a lady any particular attention in the 4 years since his wife had died. The mothers of the season had long since stopped arranging their daughters in his path. He was watching the seating, too. He had watched the young woman in gray be directed to her place below the salt, had heard Lady Prudence's remark carry down the table, and had seen the way the young woman received it, which was to say, he had seen her receive nothing at all. Her stillness interested him. Most people who were insulted did something with their faces. This one had simply become quieter, the way a room becomes quieter, and he found he could not look away from the particular discipline of it. Beside him, his host's son, a florid young man named Charles Denby, followed his gaze and misread it entirely. "Bah, that one," Charles said, lowering his voice into the register. "Menus for confidences they are proud of. Miss Fairley. A charity case my mother took on some cousin of a cousin, ruined, when her father died in debt. She earns her keep as a sort of companion. Pleasant enough to look at, I suppose, if you don't mind that. She has nothing and never will." Rowan said nothing. He turned the glass another quarter turn and set it down untouched on the sill. The dinner proceeded. Above the salt, the conversation ran to the season, to a marriage being arranged between 2 families whose lands adjoined to the price of wheat, and the impertinence of tenants. Below the salt the tutor ate carefully, and the old cousin dozed between courses, and Marianne answered when she was spoken to, which was seldom, and otherwise attended to. The small business of getting through an evening she had known would be like this from the moment the invitations to the neighboring gentry had been sent, and she had understood she was to be displayed rather than welcomed. She was good at getting through evenings. She had become very good at it. What she was not prepared for was the servant who appeared at her shoulder midway through the fish, murmured an apology, and asked whether she would be so kind as to attend to the child, who had woken and would not be settled by the nurse and had asked, specifically for the lady who read to her. The child was not a Denby. The child was the Baron's daughter, a girl of 5 named Beatrice, brought along because the Baron did not like to leave her and did not trust her health to servants alone. Marianne had met her only that afternoon, in the corridor outside the nursery, where Beatrice had been standing very small and very furious over a torn picture book, and Marianne had knelt and mended the tear with a pin, and read her the page that had come loose, and had thought nothing more of it. Now she rose from her place below. The salt made her quiet excuses that no one above the salt troubled to hear, and went up. She did not know that the Baron watched her go. The nursery was warm and dim, a single candle burning, and Beatrice sat up in the great bed with her face blotched from crying and her small fists knotted in the coverlet. She had dark hair like her father, and a stubbornness in her chin that was entirely her own, and when she saw Marianne in the doorway she stopped crying with the abruptness of the very young. "You came," Beatrice said as though this were a matter of some doubt. "I said I would read to you before I left this house," Marianne answered, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. "I keep my promises. It is nearly the only thing left to me that I can keep, so I keep it carefully." She did not mean the child to understand that. Beatrice, who understood more than she was given credit for, reached out and touched the mended page of the picture book that lay on the coverlet, the tear held together still by Marianne's pen, and something in her small face eased. Marianne read to her. She read low and slow, the way her own mother had read to her a lifetime ago, and Beatrice's eyelids grew heavy, and at some point the nurse, hovering anxiously by the door, was waved gently away and did not return. And so neither of them noticed, at first, that the Baron had come to stand in the corridor outside the half-open door, drawn up from the dinner by a servant's report that his daughter had settled, wanting to see the settling for himself, and had stopped there because to enter would be to end something he found he did not want to end. He listened to a woman the house had seated below the salt reading, to his motherless child in a voice with no performance in it, no awareness of being heard, and he thought of the last person who had read to Beatrice in that room, and his hand rose without his permission to the breast of his coat, where a small folded thing had lived for 4 years against his heart. He did not go in. When the reading stopped and the child slept, he withdrew down the corridor before Marianne could see him, and he went back to a dinner he no longer had any appetite for, and he said nothing to anyone. Something in the county's cold Baron had shifted a quarter turn the way his wineglass had, and it would not shift back. The following morning, Marianne was set to her ordinary tasks, which in the Denby house meant whatever no one else wished to do. She copied letters for Lady Prudence in a hand far better than Lady Prudence's own. She walked the youngest Denby girls to their music master. She turned the heels of stockings and read aloud to the old cousin, who was deaf and required the same page 3 times. She did these things without complaint, not because she did not feel the indignity, but because complaint was a currency she could not afford to spend. It was on the 3rd such morning that she encountered the Baron again, and this time he did not withdraw. She had been sent to the library to find a volume Lady Prudence wanted, and could not name precisely, and she was standing on the little rolling step reaching for a book on a high shelf, when she heard the door and turned and found him there. He was dressed for riding, dark and plain, and he had clearly not expected to find anyone, and for a moment they simply regarded each other across the quiet room, full of leather and dust and slanting winter light. "Miss Fairley," he said. He knew her name. She had not told it to him. "My lord." She came down from the step, the book held against her. "I did not mean to intrude. I was sent for a book." "You are not intruding." He crossed to the window where a chair sat, and did not sit in it. "My daughter asked for you this morning, the one who reads. She was displeased to learn you had duties elsewhere." Marianne felt something turn over in her chest, quick and warm and dangerous, and she suppressed it the way she suppressed everything. "She is a dear child. I was glad to be of use to her. You mended her book with a pin." It was a small thing. It was not a small thing to her. He was looking at her with a directness that most people softened. He did not soften it. She has not asked for anyone in a long time. She does not ask. And then she asked for you." There was a silence in which Marianne did not know what she was permitted to say. Below stairs, she was a companion of no fortune seated below the salt, and here was a baron speaking to her, as though her opinion had weight, and the distance between those two facts was so great that she felt almost dizzy standing in it. "My lord," she said carefully, "I think your daughter is lonely, and I think she is clever, and I think she notices a great deal that the people around her assume she does not. If she asked for me, it is because I sat down beside her rather than above her. Children feel the difference. They feel it before anyone teaches them the words for it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile but was closer to one than his face had come in some time. "Come inside," he said. And it took her a moment to understand that he meant the library, that she was already inside, that what he meant was, "Stay. Sit down. You have been standing since I came in, and you are holding that book as though it might defend you." She sat. She did not need to. She sat because the command was gentle underneath its plainness, and because she was tired in a way she had not admitted to herself, and because for the first time in 11 months, someone had told her to rest rather than to work. They spoke for the better part of an hour, though afterward, she could not have said exactly of what. Of books, of the estate, of his daughter, of a governess he had dismissed for cruelty and not yet replaced. He did not ask her about her father's debts, which everyone else in the county asked about within minutes of learning her name, as though her ruin were the only interesting thing about her. He asked her what she thought. He listened to the answers. When she rose at last to go, he stood as well, which no one in the Denby house had done for her since she arrived. "Miss Fairley," he said, "my daughter's care has been left too long to whoever the house could spare. I intend to remedy that. I would take it as a kindness if you would consider whether the position might suit you." She stood very still. A governess in the baron's house. It was a rise so slight in the eyes of the world as to be invisible, and it was the difference between being a thing the Denbys used and a woman with a place of her own. She understood exactly how much he was offering and exactly how careful she must be in accepting it. "I would have to speak to Lady Prudence," she said. "I will speak to Lady Prudence," he answered, and there was something in the way he said it that made her believe the matter was already settled. It was not, of course. Lady Prudence did not surrender her charity cases easily, in part because a charity case one can display is a proof of one's own generosity, and in part because she had begun, over 3 months, to enjoy having a gentlewoman of good birth to seat below the salt. The baron, however, was not a man one refused over a governess, and so by the week's end, Marianne had removed her small trunk from the Denby house to the baron's estate at Wexley, and had taken up the care of a 5-year-old who greeted her arrival by placing the mended picture book solemnly in her hands, as though returning it to its rightful keeper. To the county she was still nothing. The county merely adjusted its account of her. Where before she had been the ruined gentlewoman the Denbys sheltered, now she was the ruined gentlewoman the baron employed, and the distinction, to the county, was one of address and not of station. She heard the label pass by her in the market town not a fortnight after her removal. She had been sent in the gig to fetch ribbon and a length of stuff for Beatrice's winter frock, and she was standing at the draper's counter with the bolt of grey wool under her hands, matching thread to it in the poor light, when 2 ladies came in behind her and did not trouble to lower their voices because they had taken her, from her plain gown and her occupation, for a person who did not signify. "That is the Wexley governess," the first said to the second. "The Fairley girl, well born, they say, before the money went. A pity she will not marry now. A woman with nothing and a debt behind her name marries no one. The baron keeps her for the child, and sensible of him, for a governess of good blood is cheaper than a lady and better spoken than a servant. And there is no risk in it, for a man of his rank would no more look at her than at the girl who blacks his grates." Marianne finished matching her thread. She paid the draper his shillings, and took up her parcel and walked out past the 2 ladies, with her basket on her arm and her chin level, and she did not turn her head and she gave them nothing to carry away and repeat. She had heard it before. She would hear it again. She had stopped, some months ago, arguing with the world's verdict on her because the world did not attend to argument, and because there was a kind of peace in ceasing to hope for what one had been told one could not have. Peace of that kind is only the scar over a wound, and her wound was an old one. She had once expected to be chosen freely and gladly by someone who saw her whole. Her father had promised her a season she never had. He had died before he could give it, and the debts had died his promise with him, and Marianne had folded away the expectation the way she had folded away her mother's ring, out of sight, where it could not be taken from her and could not be looked at either. At Wexley she was, if not happy, then something steadier than she had been. Beatrice bloomed under attention that did not come and go with the convenience of a household. Marianne taught her letters and sums and the names of the birds that came to the terrace, and read to her every evening, and slowly the child's stubbornness turned from a shield into something more like humor, and the Baron, who might have left his daughter's governess entirely to the nursery, did not. He came to the schoolroom. He came at first with a reason, each time. A question about Beatrice's progress. A book he thought the child might like, and then he came without reasons, and stood by the window while Marianne finished a lesson, and Beatrice would run to him, and he would put his hand on her dark head and listen while she recited the birds. There was one gray afternoon she remembered afterward, with particular clearness. Beatrice had been set to copy her letters, and had made a wretched, blotted business of the capital R, which was her father's initial, and which she wished above all things to render well. And she had thrown down the pen in a small fury and declared she would never learn it, and there was no use in trying. Marianne had not scolded her. She had drawn a fresh sheet toward herself, taken up the pen, and shown the child how the stroke was made, slow and unhurried, one line down and one curve and one leg out to steady it, and had said that everything difficult was only a number of easy things done in the right order, and that a person who could learn one letter could learn the whole alphabet. And a person who could learn the alphabet could learn anything the world contained. The Baron had come in halfway through this and stood by the door, and neither of them had seen him. Beatrice had bent again over the sheet, her tongue between her teeth, and had made the R, imperfectly, but entirely, and had looked up with her whole face open. And Marianne had said simply that it was well done, and had meant it. When she looked up at last, the Baron was watching her, and there was something in his regard she could not name, and did not dare to. And he said only that he had not known letters could be taught, as though they were a kindness, and went out again without another word. Marianne, watching the cold Baron of the county's report, thaw by degrees in the presence of his own child, understood that the coldness had never been coldness. It had been grief, worn so long it had taken the shape of the man. She learned the shape of it one evening in early winter. Beatrice had been put to bed. Marianne had lingered in the schoolroom to set the next day's work in order, and the Baron had come in, and instead of standing by the window he had sat, which he did not usually do, in the small chair by the cold grate, and turned in his hands a thing she had not seen before. A miniature in a worn gold case, of a fair young woman with Beatrice's exact chin. Her mother, he said, before Marianne could look away and pretend she had not seen. Beatrice does not remember her. She was too young. Sometimes I think that is a mercy, and sometimes I think it is the cruelest thing of all that she lost her and cannot even grieve her, because you cannot grieve what you never had. Marianne set down the slate she had been holding, and said nothing, because she had learned that the largest things want silence around them, not words. She died, bringing Beatrice into the world, he went on. His voice level in the way she had come to understand meant the opposite of calm. The physician told me it might go hard. I chose to believe him when he also told me it might not. I have wondered since whether a different choice, a different physician, a different anything, might have. One does not get to know. One only gets to carry it. He closed the miniature and held it a moment in his closed hand. I have not spoken of her aloud in 4 years. I do not know why I have spoken of her now. Marianne thought she knew. She thought he had spoken because she was a person who kept her grief where he kept his, folded away and worn against the heart, and that some part of him had recognized in her stillness the answer to his own. "You carry it well," she said at last quietly. "So well that the county has decided you have no heart at all. They are wrong about you. I think perhaps they are wrong about most people they are certain of." He looked up at her, and for a moment the level thing in his voice was in his eyes as well, and neither of them moved, and the cold grate, and the single candle, and the whole silent house seemed to lean in around that stillness. Then he stood, and put the miniature away in his coat, and bid her good night. And the ordinary world came back. Yet it had changed. They both knew it had changed. And the trouble with a thing that changes between two people is that other people begin to see it, and not all of them wish it well. Lady Prudence Denby saw it at the Michaelmas assembly. The Baron had not been expected to attend. He never attended. Yet he came, and he brought his household, and Marianne was there in her one good gown, the dove-gray silk cut down from a better time, standing at the edge of the room where governesses stood, against the wall near the door, in the place a woman takes when she wishes to be counted present, without being counted at all. She had thought she might pass the evening there unremarked, watching the dancing she was not asked to join, and she had made her peace with it before she came. She was aware of him the moment he entered. She was aware of him the way one is aware of a change in the weather, before the eye confirms it. A pressure at the edge of things. She did not look toward the door. She looked very deliberately at the dancers, and kept her breath even, and told herself that a baron who had come to an assembly had 100 reasons to come that had nothing to do with a governess by the wall. Then he was crossing the room. She knew it without turning. She felt the room's attention turn with him, felt it swing like a weather vane, and still she did not look, until he was standing before her, holding out a glass of ratafia she had not asked for, and could not in courtesy refuse. And she took it, and her gloved fingers were not quite steady, and she hoped he had not seen. He had seen. He saw everything about her. She was learning that she most wished unseen. He stood beside her, and did not leave. And the pull of his nearness ran along her arm where the ratafia glass trembled, a warmth with no rational name, and she stood in it, and let no part of it show in her face. The room noticed. Rooms always notice, and Lady Prudence, who had a niece named Cassandra, newly out and expensively dressed and arranged that very evening in the Baron's likely path, noticed most of all. Cassandra Denby was everything. Marianne was no longer. She was 19 and unmarked by loss, with a fortune of £8,000, and a laugh she had been taught to deploy, and she had been raised in the certain knowledge that she was the correct choice for exactly the kind of man the Baron was. She had been arranged in his path all evening, and he had crossed the room to a governess in a made-over gown, as though Cassandra were not in it. Lady Prudence did not fragment. Lady Prudence calculated. That was the more dangerous thing. "My lord," she said, appearing at the Baron's elbow with her fan at its measured height, "how good of you to grace us, and how kind of you to look in on your servant. I do hope Miss Fairley gives satisfaction. One never knows, with a girl of her history, whether the training will hold or whether the blood will tell. Her father, you know, was a great one for appearances, right up until the appearances collapsed and left his creditors to sort the difference. It was masterful. It reminded the Baron of Marianne's station, of her ruin, of her father's disgrace, all in the register of solicitude, all while smiling. It was designed to make the Baron's attention appear a charity, at best, and a folly at worst, and to make Marianne, standing there in her cut-down silk, feel every eye in the room reassessing her downward. Marianne felt it. Her face did not move. The hand holding the ratafia glass, though, had gone white at the knuckle, and the Baron, who had learned to read her stillness as she had once learned to read Lady Prudence's fan, saw it. He did not raise his voice. He did not match the cruelty. He simply looked at Lady Prudence with the flat, level regard that had frightened stronger people than she, and said, "Miss Fairley gives every satisfaction." I find her the best informed and best-mannered person of my acquaintance in this county. I do not concern myself with her father's creditors. I concern myself with her." And then he offered Marianne his arm, in front of the whole assembly, and walked her the length of the room to where his daughter sat sleepy on a footman's care, and did not walk her back. The room drew its conclusions. The room always draws its conclusions, and they are usually the cruelest available. By the following morning, the county had decided that the Wexley governess had set her cap at the Baron, and half succeeded, and that Lady Prudence had been made a fool of in her own assembly, and that something would have to be done to restore the proper order of things. Lady Prudence agreed. Something would have to be done, and she was a woman who, when she set out to do something, did it in daylight, with witnesses, in a room she controlled. The invitation came a fortnight later. A dinner at the Denby house, a grand one, to celebrate Cassandra's coming out in proper style, with all the county gentry invited, and the Baron of Wexley chief among them. And by the particular courtesy of the household, Miss Fairley was to be included as well, that she might not be left alone at Wexley while her employer dined, and that the Baron might see, perhaps in the setting of a proper table, exactly where his governess belonged. Marianne understood the trap the moment she read the card. She was being invited so that she could be seated below the salt again, in front of the man who had crossed a room for her, so that the whole county could watch him, reminded of the true distance between them. She was to be the lesson. She was to be shamed in daylight, in the one house where she had been shamed before, and the shaming was to be the thing that put the Baron's folly to rest and the world back on its axis. She told the Baron she thought it better she did not attend. "You will attend," he said, in the schoolroom quietly, and it was the command voice, but underneath it, this time was something she had not heard from him before, something that was not level at all. "You will attend, and you will wear your gray silk, and you will not sit where they put you as though it were your due. Do you understand me? My lord, I do not think you know what they intend. I know exactly what they intend." He came a step closer, and his hand rose as though to take hers, and stopped short, hovering, not arriving, because they were both still bound by everything the world required. Marianne! It was the first time he had used her given name. It landed in the quiet schoolroom like a struck bell. Trust me to know my own mind. I've spent 4 years believing it was already spent. I find that it was not. Come to the dinner, let them do their worst, and then watch what I do. She did not sleep that night. His use of her name went round and round in her, and beneath it, a hope she had folded away 11 months ago and sworn never to unfold again had begun, against all her discipline, to lift at one corner. The Denby dining hall on the night of the dinner was everything it had been the first time, and more. 40 covers laid the length of the great table, the candles doubled, the plate at its brightest, the orchestra of the season's conversation tuning itself among the guests, and at the center of the table, in its place of honor, the great salt silver and gleaming, the axis around which the whole social machinery of the room revolved. Marianne was shown to her seat by a footman who would not meet her eye. It was below the salt, it was below the tutor, and the old deaf cousin, at the very foot of the table, the lowest place the room contained. Cassandra Denby sat above the salt in white and pearls radiant and arranged. In the chair beside the empty place of honor that was meant for the Baron, Lady Prudence sat at the head in her diamonds and surveyed her work, and found it good. The Baron had not yet arrived. He arrived as the first course was going down, later than courtesy strictly allowed, and the room turned to him, as rooms turn to the most important person to enter them. Lady Prudence rose to greet him with every appearance of warmth, and gestured him graciously toward the seat of honor, beside her niece above the salt, at the bright heart of the table where he belonged. He did not go to it. He stood a moment at the head of the room, and his gaze went the length of the table past Cassandra in her pearls, past the diamonds and the plate and the 40 faces turning to watch, all the way down to the foot, below the salt, where a woman in cut-down gray silk sat very still, with her hands folded and her face giving the room nothing. And then the Baron of Wexley walked the whole length of the Denby dining hall, past the seat of honor, past the salt, down to the foot of the table, and he stopped behind Marianne Fairley's chair, and the room went entirely silent, and in that silence he offered her his hand. She looked up at him. "Come and sit beside me," he said. "I do not dine below my betrothed." 12 words. They landed in the silence and did not echo, because there was nothing in the room to echo against. Only 40 people holding their breath at once. For a moment, no one moved at all. Cassandra's arranged smile had frozen on her face. Lady Prudence's fan had stopped at exactly the height it had risen to. And Marianne, who had schooled her face to give nothing for 11 months, felt it break at last, not into tears but into something that had been waiting under the stillness all that time, and she put her ungloved hand into the Baron's, and on the third finger of it, where the whole room could now see it, was a small garnet ring that had been her mother's. He raised her from her chair. He did not make a speech. He had said the only 12 words the moment required, and he said no more, because to say more would have been to turn a reckoning into a spectacle, and he was not a man who mistook one for the other. Lady Prudence found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "My lord, surely you cannot mean she has nothing. She has less than nothing. There is a debt behind her name." "There is a debt behind her father's name," the Baron said. "I have looked into it. It will be settled by the new year. Quietly, and it is no concern of anyone at this table, least of all of you." He turned from her, which was its own kind of answer, and looked instead down the table at the guests. "Miss Fairley has done me the honor of accepting my hand. I had thought to make it known at Christmas. Your hospitality has advanced the occasion. I thank you for it." It was, Marianne understood, the perfect displacement. He had not humiliated Lady Prudence. He had thanked her. He had taken the trap she had built to shame Marianne, and without raising his voice or spending a cruel word, had made it the setting for the announcement of Marianne's rise. The county would speak of nothing else for a 12-month, and in every telling, Lady Prudence would be the woman who had unwittingly hosted the betrothal of the Baron of Wexley to the governess she had seated below the salt. Cassandra, to her credit, recovered faster than her aunt. Und she was 19 and had been told all her life that she was the correct choice, and she was learning, in this one hard public moment, that being the correct choice and being the chosen one were not the same thing. She inclined her head to Marianne, a small, stiff gesture. And it cost her, and it was the beginning of her growing into a better woman than her aunt had raised her to be. The dinner went on, because dinners do. Marianne sat above the salt now, beside the Baron, did not gloat, and did not shrink, and was simply at last in a place that fit her. The candlelight that had thinned below the salt fell full on her. Here she found she could bear it. Later, much later, when the carriages had been called and the county had dispersed to spread the news to every drawing-room within 20 miles, the Baron handed Marianne up into his carriage and sat across from her in the dark, and for a while neither of them spoke. Because some things are too large for a moving carriage and want a fire and a settled room around them. "You might have warned me," she said finally, "that you meant to say it there, before all of them. I might have. I did not, because you would have refused to come, and because I wanted them to see it in the exact room where they thought to make you small." He was quiet a moment. "And because I have spent 4 years learning to say nothing at all, and I found I could only manage 12 words. I hoped they would be the right 12. They were." She turned the garnet ring on her finger, the ring he had asked her for a fortnight past in the schoolroom, in a proposal so quiet and so unlike the grand thing that had just happened, that she had almost not believed it real until now. "When did you decide?" "I have wondered." "Was it the library?" "It was the nursery," he said. "The first night. You read to my daughter as though no one were listening, and I stood in the corridor and could not make myself leave. And I understood that I had been carrying something folded up against my heart for 4 years, and that it had just, without my leave, begun to unfold. I did not know your name yet. I learned it the next morning. I had already decided." He paused. "I am not a man of many words, Marianne. I will not be. I will never seat you below the salt in my house or in any house, not ever, and I will spend the rest of my life, making certain you never again believe yourself a woman no one would choose. Wexley in December was a house full of fires. Snow had come in the night, and lay clean and blue-white over the terrace where Beatrice had learned the names of birds. And inside, in the small, warm sitting room that Marianne had already begun to think of as hers, a fire burned low and steady in a grate that was no longer cold. Beatrice had been told the news, and had received it with the fierce practicality of the very young, which was to ask whether it meant Marianne would now stay always, and to be told that it did, and to nod once as though a long-standing administrative error had finally been corrected. She sat now on the hearthrug with the mended picture book, the tear still held by Marianne's pin all these months later, tracing the page with one finger while the firelight moved on her dark hair. The Baron stood at the window with his hand at the breast of his coat, where the miniature still lived, and where it would go on living, because the dead are not displaced by the living in a heart large enough to hold both. He had told Marianne so, and she had understood, because she wore her own dead against her hand, and always would. She sat by the fire with her mother's garnet ring catching the light, no longer hidden beneath a glove, and she watched the man and the child who were, improbably past all the world's certain arithmetic, to be her own. Below the salt, the county had decided, was where a woman with nothing belonged. The county had been wrong, as the county so often is, about a woman it had never troubled to see. Outside the snow went on falling, quiet and complete, over Wexley and its fires and the small bright ring and the mended book, and Marianne Fairley, who had folded away every hope she had 11 months before, unfolded the last of them at last, in the warm and the light, and let it stay unfolded. If Marianne's journey moved you, stay a moment when it ends, and let me know the part that stayed with you. Thank you for sitting with her through the whole long dinner, all the way to the fire.